let's talk about this great negotiation skill. So Donald Trump, once confronted about the failure of his ability to, get a ceasefire in place after, 24 hours or before he was sworn in, like at one point he promised, or after 100 days, which was the next promise, or to bring, real consequences to the Russians if they didn't agree to the 30-day unilateral ceasefire, after giving sufficient consequences to the Ukrainians, both through public relations fiascos and through actual undermining of Ukrainian aid, Ukrainian not only financial assistance, but I mean, we're talking about not only U.S. aid being cut, but also weapons cuts.
Corrupt, bankrupt man.
The cutting of aid, the holding off of aid to try to get them to agree to a ceasefire that when the Russians didn't agree to it, they got no problems. I mean, when it came to tariff time, Ukraine got a tariff. Russia didn't even get a tariff. And the reason that was given by the administration was, well, we didn't want it to endanger negotiations. So pressuring the Ukrainians endangers negotiations in no matter. But pressuring the Russians with, even tariffs, let alone sanctions, when Trump is the tariff king right now and he's willing to tariff Penguin Island, but not the Russians. It seemed like a negotiation strategy completely devoid of pressure, but sufficiently filled with the illusion of pressure, i.e., there'll be consequences if you do X, Y, Z, and then X, Y, Z never comes. X, Y, Z does come, but the consequences never come. And there's even been a type of bet on Wall Street that I keep hearing about, and it's the taco bet, which means Trump always chickens out. The idea that Trump will make a threat or will make a commitment to do something and will back off that threat. That's mostly used in reference to tariffs, but the taco bet could probably be used when it comes to this negotiation process as well. Because he threatened sanctions against the Russians on the campaign trail if they didn't come to the table and seriously negotiate. And those sanctions never came. He even offered the big threat of secondary sanctions, which would be devastating to the Russian economy and devastating to those who continue to deal with the Russians, which would probably scare many nations away from trading with them or continuing to support the Russian economy sufficiently. And those sanctions never came. He promised major shipments of aids and weapons deliveries if the Russians did not negotiate seriously. That never came. When he threatened the 30-day unilateral ceasefire, he said, look, you have to do this immediately. You need to do it. If you don't, there'll be consequences. We and the Europeans agreed, and then it didn't happen. He said there would not be consequences immediately, and that he still hoped negotiations would continue, and he just dropped on that. And so, the Russians have kind of even commented on this.
Morally corrupt.
The Russians have commented on this. We have had Russian government officials referring to Trump not really understanding the situation. I remember that was being talked about on CNN. I think I actually have a clip pulled up. This was one response they've had to the whole situation and the increased pressure that Trump talks verbally without any physical pressures. Here is the statement from him.
Quote, not sufficiently informed. That's how an aide to Russian President Vladimir Putin is describing President Trump today, after the president wrote that Putin was playing with fire by keeping up Russia's barrage of attacks in Ukraine. The aide told Russian state TV, quote, Trump says a lot of things. Naturally, we read and monitor all of this, but in many ways, we have come to the conclusion that Trump is not sufficiently informed about what is really happening in the context of the Russian-Ukraine confrontation. CNN is also now reporting.
Might be one of the few times that I actually agree with Russian aid to Vladimir Putin. By the way, Degenerate Liberty, thank you so much for the gifted sub and Astro for the 100 biddies. I appreciate you guys contributing to the hype train and getting into level 2. Thank you, thank you. But their position, he's not sufficiently informed. I generally agree with that. But we've seen Russia Today say that Trump's position basically just flips overnight, openly mocking it. That's Russian state TV for an English-speaking audience. And so there seems to be at least some acknowledgement from over there in Moscow that Trump has this tendency to say one thing and then change from that position and then change from that position again. And so not only did Trump undermine his leverage by, talking the way he did on the campaign trail about negotiating with the Russians, and talking about how the Ukrainians had to do X, Y, and Z when he could have negotiated from a position of more relative strength. But he also undermined their position by continuously making threats and not delivering on it, making it look like he's basically a dog with all bark and no
Burns is
bite.
an immoral,
And if you got
morally
no bite,
corrupt, bankrupt
what you
man.
scared of? So after this strategy of threat, backtrack, threat, backtrack, threat, backtrack, can kick, Trump has decided to become the can kicking world champion. And I say this seriously. I say this with seriousness, that I think that out of all of the political can kickers, out of all the people who kicked the can down the road on different issues, whether it was people who kicked the can down the road on Brexit, whether it was the people who kicked the can down the road on any number of like the deficit, this is legendary, because Trump went from right when I win, and this was stuff that, you know, certain supporters and alternative commentators like Tim Pool, who ended up to be taking Russian money, that they like took on its face value and ran with, which was, once he gets elected, the war's over. He went from, I'm going to stop the war when I'm going to be inaugurated, all the way to here. I mean, before I get inaugurated, all the way to here. And so to already accomplish that is legendary. But what makes this world championship level to the point of GOAT status being debatable is that he is not even can kicking of different styles. He is doing a Soviet style, very clinical can kick of just same kick, same style. No, he's not like changing it up. He has found that there's one button. He's just pressing the X button over and over and over. That works. And that is 2 weeks. That's the word, 2 weeks. When he's asked once again about will there be any consequences for the Russians, Donald Trump said to reporters today, in 2 weeks, if there's no more progress, we'll know that Putin's dragging us along. And if that's the case, I will respond differently. What differently means, if that means he'll implement the sanctions, that there's some reports that he might be considering more, but who knows if that's true or not. Will it be any aid to Ukraine? Almost certainly not. Even though, you know, weapon shipments to Ukraine, he did talk about that on the campaign trail. Will it be weapon sales? Possibly increase weapon sales. I mean, or will it be walking away, as JD Vance seems to be, I think, definitely pondering over, definitely something that that's a pathway he wants to take. Let's listen to the president respond to what are we going to do now, Mr. Sir? We're gonna pressure the Russians.
Do you believe the Russians are being disrespectful when they say that your criticisms of Putin are simply an emotional response? And do you still believe that Putin actually wants to end the war?
I can't tell you that, but I'll let you know in about 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, we're going to find out very soon. We're going to find out whether or not he's tapping us along or not. And if he is, we'll respond a little bit differently, but it'll take about a week and a half, 2 weeks. We have Mr. Witkoff is here, who's doing a phenomenal job, is dealing with them very strongly right now. They seem to want to do something, but until the document is signed, I can't tell you. Nobody can. I can say this. That
occurred is occurred.
I'm very disappointed at what happened
Gifted 3 tier 1
a couple of nights now, where people were killed in the middle of what you would call a negotiation. I'm very disappointed by that. Very, very disappointed.
This negotiation's been going on for like going past like 150 days now, since he's been inaugurated, when supposedly it was supposed to be going on before he was even inaugurated. So we could run that clock up to nearing 200 days if we want to be cheeky, okay? Going past 200 days if we really don't want to give him any benefit of the doubt. But I will give benefit of the doubt to Dense Pixel for the 3 tier 1 subs in site chat of all places, with the fantastic Degenerate Liberty, Jacket to Hearts, and all these other fantastic people, Black-Pilled Kiwi, hanging out in site chat. The best chat at DylanBurns.tv. Anyway, continuing, self-plugs aside, This is what makes Trump a generational GOAT contender for the can-kicking world championship, not just for 2025, but like the Muhammad Ali. Like, we got to consider how this guy is rechanging the game with this Willie Pep step. Here is Trump just repeating the same 2-week lines. It'll be over in 2 weeks on both April 27th, May 19th, and today. Same little layup.
You trust President Putin? You know, in about 2 weeks.
Is Ukraine doing that?
You trust President Putin? You know, in about 2 weeks.
Is Ukraine doing enough to get this?
I'd rather tell you in about 2 weeks from now.
Keep saying 2 weeks about President Putin. What is 2 weeks? Give us, what is the actual date? What is the timeline?
2 weeks or less, and if it's a little more at the time, I say, but, you know, they're losing a lot of people.
That last one, again, was April 27th. We're about to enter June. Most analysts predict offensives in the summer. And let me tell you right now, I got back from the Pokrovsk Axis 2 weeks ago. I was in Pokrovsk City working to film drone teams and the conditions that the civilians that have stayed in the city are facing. And let me tell you, they're conducting offensives right now. I mean, I see them advancing on the east side of the Pokrovsk area, like towards the city from the east. They're trying to advance from the south. They're trying to advance from the west. They're going towards the villages in the Dnipro region. They're likely going to enter the Dnipro region in the months to come, and fighting over those villages will commence. Their Dnipro region's already being bombed. There's talk of the Russians of buffer zones in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. So taking over territory, more territory in Ukraine and other regions like Sumy and Kharkiv, expanding the war. Volchansk looks like it's been burnt to the ground 10 times over. They're doing an escalation of drone attacks across the country. Just a month or two ago, they did the largest draft of, like, I think 15 years. Not to even mention all of these different civilian strikes. And it seems to always be 2 weeks as the drone attacks escalate, as the ground attacks escalate, and as analysts predict major offensives in the summer. And all the movements I see on the ground correlate with that. 2 weeks away, 2 weeks away, 2 weeks away. If it was 2 weeks away the first time he said it, maybe this wouldn't be a problem. If it was 2 weeks away on April 17th, maybe it wouldn't be a problem. If it's 2 weeks away on May 19th, you know, you're delaying more, you're pushing it, maybe it won't be a problem. 2 weeks away now is going into summer. Summer is in just 2 to 3 days. 2 to 3 days. That's when summer starts. That's when analysts have predicted the offensives are going to start. This is what I want to warn you guys of more than anything. What I fear is we're going to 2 weeks ourselves through over 200 days. It's the end. It's the 2 weeks that has never ended. And by the time that 2 weeks does run out and there are consequences, it'll be when the Russians are advancing on Pokrovsk City from the south, the east, and the west, trying to take Mirorod and Pokrovsk, then pushing towards the north, towards Dobropila, pushing through Chasiv Yar to capture Konstantinivka, which they're doing right now, pushing on to Kramatorsk, pushing on to Slovyansk, cities of over 100,000 people each. But the Russians are still talking about taking the city of Zaporizhia, crossing Kherson again, more offensives, and it's going to be after the largest part of those offensives have started, either through a boiling the frog approach, through smaller offensives becoming larger offensives, which I think is the most likely outcome, or through a large spike, a big increase, a big wave, like this is the day where the artillery fire gets particularly bad. Either way it happens. Either we got to that point, we've gotten to the peak of the mountain through boiling the frog, or through this big offensive. Once we're there, and we're responding at that point, it's already too late. This is why the Biden administration works so hard to get so many weapons, or try to get, when I say so many weapons, get some weapons, get some supplies in before the war actually started, or at least the full-scale war finally started on February 24th. It was because once the Russian tanks cross the border, the troops need the weapons down. if the Russian troops cross the border and the shipments start, no, the agreements start on the 24th, and then the shipments start maybe at the end of the month, then you see the problem. By the time the Russian troops are going to be marching on Kiev, they're not going to have that equipment. And so by the time that this weapon sale could be made to, you know, send another Patriot battery, or to send Patriot air defense systems, or for the Europeans to stop the squabbling and send an extra system, or for the artillery shells from the 155 factories in Scranton to be sending over shells. Once that happens, I feel like it's going to be after when it would have been the best time to send it, which is yesterday and the day before. Yesterday and the day before, absolutely. And look, it's not like the State Department doesn't kind of realize what's going on. It's not like people, I think, even think a lot of people in the Trump orbit don't realize what's going on. People in the Trump world right now, the ones that begrudgingly accepted Trump are horrified, and even those who have the president's best interests at heart don't know how to swallow the situation. Here is a Department of State spokesperson talking about that if the Russians cared about negotiations, they would change their behavior. Great. Why are we doing this whole shebang then? Why are we doing this without, we need to change the conditions on the ground if we want to change the behavior of the Russians.
Immoral.
Question, get your reaction to Russia's response to the president's tweets, calling it emotional.
Yes, well, you know, I'm not going to speak about the president's emotions, but I think one reason why he was elected with a mandate last year is that we can all relate to him. He's transparent. He's doing something he cares passionately about. He knows what.
By the way, transparent. I remember watching Caroline Leavitt justify not releasing the name of any individual, not a single person who went to the Trump crypto dinner. Not a single person. Complete transparency. And unless they're talking about things like drone strikes, where we're actually decreasing the amount of transparency he had. That's Trump term 1, by the way.
What he wants to accomplish. He inherited a world that was on fire and is determined to stop those things. We've heard his remarks about all of this, clearly indicating a personal interest in the nature of what is occurring. And I think that that's what we all appreciate about him. If the Russians cared about the nature of how this is proceeding, they would be thinking less about that and more about what they could do, which is in their hands, to stop the carnage and the slaughter that's happening right now. So it's, I think, pretty clear where both sides are at this point.
And given the president's public frustration of Putin, is it fair to expect some immediate policy adjustment?
I wouldn't call it frustration. It is a statement of the man who has led the effort for peace in so many different regions, making it clear and being completely transparent about his opinion about what's transpired. And I think that is something Russia should take seriously. Americans certainly do. And there are, as I mentioned last week, that there are many different things.
Ooh, Trump will be transparent about his opinion as if he's never been absolutely. Trump is translucent when it comes to what his opinion is. Okay, not transparent. My God, he's translucent.
That
what does that do?
The president has at his disposal to make sure that our position is felt and that that can be used to make an impact to stop this carnage. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Stop the carnage. Stop the carnage. Stop the carnage. And let me tell you, this war is awful. This video that particularly stuck with me recently, and I wanted to show just a second of it before we moved on to another conservative who thinks that the White House strategy is inherently flawed. Inherently flawed. This will find no success, that there's no chance of success, that there's not a minuscule of success, that we are kicking the can down the road to delay inevitable failure. Inevitable failure. And at this point, that's what I can call it. Inevitable failure. I don't think they'll stumble into a peace deal. I don't think they'll stumble into a ceasefire until the conditions are changed. Every single sign points to that. We're literally in the eye of the storm and denying the hurricane is coming. After seeing it blaze through the community, and now we're waiting for the second wave. It's like, what hurricane? Well, I wanted to show you just a little snippet of that brutality. This is a Russian soldier that has seemingly just given up. I mean, he looks like he's almost catatonic as he just sits there as a Ukrainian FPV drone, which is triggered through contact, hovers above him, monitoring him. He doesn't seem to make any effort to surrender. He doesn't seem to make any effort to beg for his life. He doesn't make any effort to run away. He doesn't seemingly make any effort to hide. He just kind of sits there. And I don't know if he accepts the situation or if he just was broken or what happens. But watching this just really shows you just how horrible the war is. And so to me, war is awful. And I want to end the war. I absolutely want to end the war. But as long as the Russians are demanding cities where they're engaging in the human safari and the militarization of the state, that they keep invading illegally while lying about invading them over and over and over again, of course that state's not going to agree to that. These are non-starter demands. And so the presidency has to find a way to make the Russians take negotiations seriously, because while war is horrific, that doesn't mean that no invading nation or conquering general isn't going to use it as a tool anyway. You know, tons of things are horrific. Tons and tons and tons of things are horrific, and they're used all the same. Torture's horrific. It's been used. The kidnapping of children is horrific. The trafficking of children is horrific. That's been used. The destruction of monuments and the burning of books. There's been all sorts of, the hunting of civilians, tons of things are horrific, and they have been used. And so if you want to end the war, it cannot just be through the engagement of a policy that has duly failed, of just endlessly talking and being strung along. And so if you want to end the horrors of this, you need to do more than virtue signal about the violence and say, why can't we all get along and take action? And when Trump is asked what is he going to do in response to the Russians not like heeding to his demands, he gets angry. He calls the journalists fake news. He can't deal with the heat on this. Most Americans think he's failing on engaging with the Russians. Most Americans think he's failing when it comes to engaging with the Ukrainians. And the vast majority of Americans, including much of his own base, already acknowledge that the odds of Trump bringing an end to this war are basically close to nil. And that's old polling. The numbers have gone down. I wouldn't be surprised if a majority of Trump supporters now think that he's not going to be able to bring a peace to an end. Maybe not a majority, maybe 60% still do. But the last time I checked, it seemed like 20% had already jumped ship, as well as the vast majority of centrists and basically every single Democrat. But let me throw at you that it's not just this one Republican. There's another Republican as well that's been lashing out a lot recently at the failure and what we all know is going to be the continued failure until there's a policy change of this Steve Witkoff negotiation strategy. Now let's listen to Ben Shapiro talk about the inherent failures of Trump's strategy and why it's not going to work until they get on the pathway of an actual peace through strength, like he talked about on the campaign trail strategy. So where's the strength, okay? Peace through strength. You need strength for the peace. You kind of made that equation, right? Peace equals strength. Strength equals the peace. You need the strength. Where's the strength?
And so right now, America's enemies, our opponents, are showing that they believe that there is play in the joints and weakness at the seams with regard to America's foreign policy. There's no question that's what's happening. Look at Russia's behavior over the course of the last several months since President Trump took office. They've been upping the ante. They're simultaneously negotiating with President Trump. And by negotiating, I mean stringing President Trump along. They've been doing this with the special envoy, Steve Witkoff, who again has yet to negotiate a really good deal anywhere that he's been deployed. In any case, according to the Wall Street Journal, Russia has now launched its largest ever drone and missile assault on Ukraine on Monday, according to Ukrainian officials, defying President Trump's calls for an end to the bombardment. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia launched more than 350 explosive drones and at least 9 cruise missiles, Kyiv scrambled aircraft and deployed electronic warfare systems and mobile air defense teams throughout the country in response. The latest attacks came just hours after President Trump issued a strong rebuke of Russian President Vladimir Putin, denouncing airstrikes on the Ukrainian capital and other cities that killed at least 12 people on Sunday. Trump went on social media, on Truth Social, and he posted he has gone absolutely crazy. He is needlessly killing a lot of people. And I'm not just talking about soldiers. And he put up this post. Missiles and drones are being shot into cities in Ukraine for no reason whatsoever. I've always said that he wants all of Ukraine, not just a piece of it. And maybe that's proving to be right. But if he does, it will lead to the downfall of Russia. Likewise, President Zelensky is doing his...
If Trump always he always undermines his argument about like NATO expansion, XYZ, which many of those in his circle make all the time. Because if the argument is NATO expansion caused this, if it wasn't due to NATO expansion, Russia wouldn't care about Ukraine, then why would Putin always wanted all of Ukraine? The way Trump even once described it was Ukraine is the apple of his eye from his private talks with Putin. Well, if that's the case, if there was no NATO, then wouldn't they just pick the apple with no resistance? I mean, I think an apple with a gate around it's probably less ripe for the picking than one with no gate.
Maybe that's proving to be right. But if he does, it will lead to the downfall of Russia. Likewise, President Zelensky is doing his country no favors by talking the way he does. Everything out of his mouth causes problems. I don't like it, and it better stop. This is a war that would never have started if I were president. This is Zelensky's, Putin's, and Biden's war, not Trump's. I'm only helping to put out the big and ugly fires that have been started through gross incompetence and hatred. Okay, so he starts off right there, and then it sort of goes wrong. Again, I'm not sure what he wants from Zelensky that Zelensky hasn't already given him. Zelensky has given him the immediate ceasefire. Zelensky has said he will go anywhere for direct talks. Zelensky gave him the rare earth minerals deal. And sort of both sides of him from the Trump administration and from President Trump is the reason why Putin is pushing. Okay, Putin believes he can get away with it. Now, President Trump, when he says that...
By the way, this is 100% true, the both sidesism. Every single time. But part of the reason why I think there's a possibility of there being a real shift, even though, you know, as a betting man, I still wouldn't put my money down on those odds. But the reason I think there might be a real shift is I saw one of the few posts from Trump where he critiqued Putin and the airstrikes and the bombing and everything without a critique of Zelensky to balance it out. And so that made me think, oh, okay, maybe there could be a real shift. But the fact that there has been so many like, oh my gosh, it's so terrible that all these civilians are being blown up. Also, Zelensky, you're a little rude about the civilians being blown up. That's not a strategy for pressure on the Russians, a strategy of peace through strength. It'd be one thing if it was like, look, the Russians have offered to end the war right now if the Ukrainians just say that they don't, try to re-enter NATO or enter NATO for the next 20 decades or whatever. That's not what's being. It's just, hey, the Ukrainians are saying that you can't really negotiate well with the Russians. They always violate the ceasefires. How dare you? Oh, they violated all their ceasefires. Well, anyway, I'm going to cut off aid to the Ukrainians, but I'm not going to put any more pressure on the Russians. It's not a strategy that makes the Russians think there's going to be any consequences for their actions. And this isn't just communicated through the verbal realm. This is communicated through the physical realm, through the cutting off of aid and the complete lack of any pressure. And so why would they concede anything until they find the limits of how they can bend the president?
Get away with it. Now, President Trump, when he says that President Putin has gone crazy and he's kind of not sure what happened to him, nothing happened to Vladimir Putin. He's one of the most consistent leaders in modern world history. He's been absolutely consistent in his territorial ambitions, in his desire to restore quote-unquote Russian greatness, in his desire for Russia to be perceived as a global hegemon in its own right, as a global power, not a regional power, a global power. Again, Putin has been absolutely consistent. Every single president seems to make this mistake with Putin. George W. Bush famously suggested he looked into Vladimir Putin's eyes and saw through to his soul. Barack Obama tried to set a reset button with Vladimir Putin and then dismissed Russia as a geopolitical enemy in 2012 in his race against Mitt Romney. Joe Biden tried to make overtures to Putin, originally suggesting that if Putin, if he sort of lightly invaded Ukraine, well, then there might not be a lot of American pushback. Everyone makes this mistake with Putin for some odd reason, but Putin has been absolutely consistent. By the way, Putin responded to President Trump's suggestion that Putin had gone crazy by suggesting that this was emotional overload. So the Kremlin, their spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said, quote, "We are really grateful to the Americans and to President Trump personally for their assistance in organizing and launching this negotiation process. This is a very crucial moment, which is, of course, associated with the emotional overload of everyone absolutely and with emotional reaction." Now, again, what the Russians are pretty openly saying at this point is that they would like to continue their expansion in Ukraine. They apparently are recruiting another 50,000 troops. That, of course, is no surprise. They're happy to throw men into the maw, into the grist mill. The Kremlin continues to maintain that they're not going to end the war short of more territorial expansion. And this, of course, is leading to Western pushback, particularly from the German chancellor. He has now come out, Friedrich Merz, and he said that Germany, along with Ukraine's other key Western backers, had lifted range restrictions on weapons they sent to Kyiv to fight against Russia, which, by the way, is the correct response. It is. Okay, if Russia gets to fight an endless war against Ukraine, then Ukraine should have the ability to strike at, for example, Russian weapons depots and supply lines inside Russia. Here's Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor.
Es gibt keiner. We don't need to hear the German chancellor. It's just so weird to hear Ben be the voice of reason in the room on this issue. It's so weird to hear Ben, because on many other issues, I don't think he's the voice of reason. I mean, I don't agree with Ben on most things in politics. But this is something where a lot of Ben's compatriots, where they would have, if the political tables were turned at the start of the invasion and Trump maybe was a lot more rah-rah Ukraine, they would be rah-rah Ukraine as well, as it would have been probably a pretty traditional Republican position. But many of his compatriots, listening to the voices of the masses yelling about biolabs and Victoria Nuland and, NATO expansion, they reeled back, taking the advice of, Dave the Comic Smith or, Scott Horton or John Mearsheimer or any other alternative theorists on the war. And so Ben Shapiro, I think in one of his debates with Destiny and in other performances up until very recently, I think had been, this is an outdated term, but kind of limp-wristed on it. He had somebody who was supposed to be very supportive of Ukraine if you balanced out any of his ideological composition, not really fiercely defending them as the Trump ran for the presidency, or defending the position of continuing to support them as Trump continued to undermine it, either during the Battle of Avdiivka when it came to weapon shipments, or later when it came to the campaign. And so he has been one of the few that have decided to really stand down and say, no, this strategy is not working. And I appreciate it. And there's not much to say during it, because he's just saying things that are kind of more basic truths that have to be spoon fed to much of the conservative movement, because they've either been taken on into Russophilic cult behavior, which I've seen that with how much people actually ate up all that Tucker Carlson nonsense, that Alexander Dugin interview, him smelling wrapped garbage bread, and they really was smelling the worst bread you could at a Russian supermarket, and taking that at face value and saying, wow, look how clean and how fantastic Russia is. And I meet certain conservatives who that's like the first, well, I saw videos of Russia and it looks so clean. Okay, let me send you to Murmansk. Okay, good luck. And that's not to say that, there isn't anything you can find nice about Russian society, but that's to say that they've been propagandized. And you're seeing this more and more in Russian events. At Trump rallies and events. Of course, there's the other people, the isolationists, who just are more towards the idea that we shouldn't really do anything on the world stage, or it's not really our business. But the lashing out at these loudest voices in the room, even if they don't make up a majority of Americans by a long shot, with still plus over 60% of the Americans, a clear majority, want to keep sending aid.
Have you seen the Reuters article yet on the leaked documents for Russian demands regarding a peace deal?
No. If you can send that to me, that would be fantastic. Thank you for the €6. I have not seen that. I am not aware of the existence of it whatsoever. But thank you for bringing it to my attention. And so watching Ben Shapiro have to spoon feed this to conservatives on one hand is kind of, relieving to see that it's not that the entire right-wing ecosystem has just completely flipped on a dime when it comes to certain geopolitical beliefs or certain basic foundational principles, and completely did it just in the service of one man, which not only would be bad politically, but also would be bad for just the cult behavior and the cult symptoms around Trump. And I keep using the word cult because when it comes to how he redefines truth, I have no other way to describe it. I have no other way to think about it. I have no other way of trying to express it, because it's the only way I can. This is cult behavior. Either way, until Donald Trump takes a pathway that's going to put pressure on the Russians are going to continue to call his bluff, snatch his pockets, and take it for everything he has. This is a KGB agent. This is a Russian dictator who assassinates his political opponents, is willing to burn cities to the ground. If you don't think he's willing to exploit the personal lack of knowledge of Donald Trump about the war, or his want to be liked by the Russian president, or any other number of prioritization of personal relationships over structural forces or institutions, he's going to take advantage of every bit of it. And sending message of prayer after the assassination and sending him paintings of himself. This is not done because I think he wants to be personal friends with the man. This is done because he thinks he can drag the man along. And even if Trump sends aid down the line, well, he delayed aid from Trump for 250 days. So, well, not aid, weapon sales. But hey, either way, if you delay the shipments of support, that makes it easier for the Russian troops on the ground in the immediate term. Also, I mean, like, look at this. Here's Pokrovsk. They're getting attacked from the east over here. They're getting attacked from the west. They're getting attacked from the south. The progress in the east is probably most concerning right now, as we're seeing the Russians. I mean, when they stick up a flag like this, doesn't mean they necessarily actually control it. It usually kind of is a good marker for like where the line of control roughly is. Because I've seen a lot of videos of these flags getting taken down right after, but it shows that they are advancing into like Malivka, into the villages and towns surrounding Pokrovsk from the south, west, and east. And so this type of three-side pocket is going to mean they're getting attacked from three sides, but they're also getting bombed from three sides. They're getting drone attacked from three sides. And so Pokrovsk is going to be going through a lot of hell. And this is the environment that we're going into the summer. We're expecting summer offensives. We're expecting summer offensives. This is why the Ukrainians want action now, not tomorrow. Janabo, I bet he loves this right now. Editing this when he's looking back at it later tonight. He's gonna love it.